Well, it's a pleasure to have you here from Tennessee.
Yes, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so Shari Jensen is a reading interventionist, and she's been working with homeschool families for the last 2 decades. Is that right? 20 years?
Well, not just homeschool families. It started out, I was a classroom teacher. So I've been teaching for 33 years now, something like that. And started out as a classroom teacher and then tutor and then I worked at the Vanderbilt Reading Clinic as their instructional coordinator there, and I set up programs for to train tutors that were learning how to teach reading with different emphasis or different degree fields like speech and language pathology or special education or things like that. And so I was the reading person that would teach them how to work with these kids in our community, struggling readers in the community. And then more recently, it's been, I would say, since COVID, it's been more shifting more toward homeschool families and setting up programs to help parents teach their own kids how to read, especially parents who have kids that are neurodivergent and don't learn with the typical programs. So that's what I do.
That is beautiful. You know what I was going to tell you, the story about me that related to you were sharing a little bit before we got recording here, that I was a challenged reader when I was early days. And I knew that something wasn't quite right, that I wasn't quite learning the way they wanted, or I didn't understand how to read the way that they wanted because they kept a bunch of us back at the back of the class. And I was really embarrassed. I didn't even know that I wasn't able to read. I definitely didn't hear, a diagnosis in any direction because those weren't then, they didn't even exist then. And but I just remember feeling really embarrassed by it. And that was what compelled me to focus in on my firstborn daughter's reading skills. I didn't even think about homeschooling until I think her kindergarten year. And then I took her out after the second grade because we were moving to a different province. And so when she went into grade one, I had heard about her grade one teacher being a really tricky person to learn from. And so I was really eager to get my daughter reading before she had to encounter this teacher. And I knew what it felt like to be held back at the back of the class. And so I didn't want that for her. So what did I do? I sat her down and I did like conventional phonics, whatever I understood for phonics, and got really frustrated when she didn't understand things, and then tried to force feed it and feel like, what's her problem? Why can't she just engage us? Why can't she just understand this? She's so smart. I know
Mm-hmm.
she's so smart, and yet she can't get this. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think I made it more tricky for her to learn to read. She learned before she was 5 anyways, or 5.5. And I mean, it was kind of despite me, I think. And it wasn't because of her grade one teacher either. So
Yeah.
it's very interesting to have a conversation with you because from my vantage point, I know what it's like to be the kid at the back of the class. And I also know what it's like to try to, with great effort and too much forcefulness, try to get my kiddo to read.
Yeah. Yeah. And developmental, stages is definitely a big factor to it. I think knowing I think one of the most powerful things that I do is to do an assessment on kids that's a detailed assessment on every area, every component of reading development, so that I have this whole picture of that child. I kind of put on this reader detective cap and try to learn everything about how their brains work and what they understand and what they don't, and which skills are starting to emerge and which ones they're not ready for. And so when I can when I can understand a whole complete picture of that child, then I know exactly where to go. Okay, this is where I need to go in this area, and this is where I need to go in this area. And I can also figure out, like, okay, what skills is this child uh what strategies work best for this particular child, and which strategies are not working, and timing. Okay, this is a kid that gets fatigued easily. So if I do reading, like reading a whole book at the beginning, for some kids, that would be definitely the way to do it. Read a whole book at the beginning because they have lots of energy, and that's when they actually have the attention for it. For other kids, they need the warm up, and they need to do all the phonics stuff and all that other stuff first to get their brains kind of ready to read, and then go into reading. So just understanding all the components that go into reading, and then also understanding that like fluency is affected by so many things that don't even have to do with reading, like processing speed and uh anxiety and a need to be perfect, and also super creative minds. Like a kid who, my child, um all three of my kids score lower on the fluency side. They're not going to read as fast word for word because they're super, super creative. So when they're reading a story, they're also imagining it in their minds, and they're taking it a step further into another realm. And so that's going to impact their processing speed
Yeah.
of this information, because they're processing more information than what's on the page. So
Mm.
all of those things are things that I take into consideration and try to figure out when developing a program for kids.
I love that. That is so good. And so then your title for your program is called Reader's Detective.
Well, yeah, our URL is readerdetective.com. Our program is called Confident Kids Academy. So,
Both. Both.
and
Lovely. I see the tie as a kid that
yeah,
naturally read right away. Definitely the confidence and the being the detective as the mom, doing that process. I use that process to help parents deschool. So to get away
yeah,
from unhelpful school mindsets, so they can really watch who is the kid that actually you're home educating, and
right.
not try to complicate it and try to school like the public school or school 25 kids. You're home educating your kids. So who are they?
Right.
And learn about your kids. So that's very much the same concept, being a
Mm-hmm.
detective of your own kids. But when you talk about how different parts of your brain develop at different stages, or how you, I may be jumping a bit, how your child engages reading, you're able to look at a specific child and determine how their brain is developing based on how they're processing. Like, how do you go about doing that, making those assessments?
Well, I think that the most powerful tools that in any first time meeting a child, there are two things that I do. One is we mess with magnetic letters. So I start first with like the word cat, and then I'll have a bunch of letters underneath like F, like so then I'll say, let's change one letter and let's make the word mat. Let's make the word fat. Let's make the word know, bat, and keep going. That's the starting point. And if they're comfortable with that, then I go into digraphs, and so let's make the word chat, and then I'll change the letter, the ending, the last letter. Okay, let's change mat to man. Now let's make it to map. And so then we mess around with the last letter. If they're comfortable with that, then we look at the beginning or the middle sound. Okay, you have the word gnat. Now let's change letter, make the word nut. And change one letter, make the word not. And change one letter, make the word knit. And so then I can see what vowels do they hear, because vowel sounds are the last to develop.
Hmm.
And so once I know what they can manipulate in a finite number of letters, so I only put out the letters that I'm actually working with. I don't give them all the letters in the alphabet and have them choose. It's just the specific ones that I'm wanting to assess. And
Yeah.
if they do well on that, then I keep going from there.
Yeah.
But that's my starting point always with beginning readers, is figuring out like what they can do in terms of making words.
Yeah.
And a lot of kids can make a word, but they can't decode a word that's already made. And so looking at that, what does that tell me about them? And then also looking at a spelling test. If they're spelling a list of words in each of the different rules, or applying each of the different rules, then that tells me a lot about which rules they can actually apply, because spelling comes after reading, decoding. So even making the words is often easier for a lot of kids. Magnetic letters, actually spelling them out of the air and having to choose at random which letter applies is way more difficult than decoding on a page, reading a word that's on the page. So
Right.
that's one piece. The other thing that I love to do is say, if you could have the perfect day, what would it look like? What would you do? And we have this whole conversation. I get their brains pumped because they're like, I would do this, and I'll ask questions like, and who are you going to bring with you, and what do you eat, and what do like I build this whole thing by asking all these questions so that they're pumped about the topic, and then I'll say, let's write about that, or draw. And if they're little, I'll have them draw a picture first, and then say, let's write about that. And I don't expect anything, and I always tell them from the beginning, this is for me, like I'm wearing my detective hat. Like, I only want to know, there is no right or wrong answer. I don't care
Yeah.
how you spell, I don't care how you write, I don't care about anything except you doing your best so that I can understand how your brain works.
Yes.
And so if they don't have spaces between the words, that tells me that they don't have voice print match. They don't understand that each cluster of letters equals a word. If they maybe they only put like in the sentence, I like spaghetti. Maybe they only put the letter I, and then the letter L, and then the letter S. That tells me that right now, developmentally, they're only ready to hear the beginning sound. That's phonologically what they're hearing, for as far as their ability to hear the sounds, and then also what they're developmentally ready to write.
Right.
Then if, as they're the next day, then we can do another journal, and maybe they write LK, then I know that they hear the beginning sound and the ending sound, and that's great. That's something to
Yeah.
celebrate, because yesterday they only heard the beginning sound. And then as time goes by, maybe they hear the I in the middle. Well, that's another thing to celebrate. So all of those things, though, tell me so much about their developmental stage.
Hang
If it's a
on.
word like spaghetti, spaghetti has lots of sounds in it. So if they hear the S and the G and the T, then awesome. So I can get a glimpse into their world through the magnetic letters and through the journal writing, in a way, if I'm not making them feel self-conscious and that it has to be perfect, and
Mhm.
oh, I don't know how to spell this, I can't do it,
Yes.
and trying to fix it. If they're not in that space, and they're just going with me and trying their very best, I can get such a great picture of developmentally which skills are emerging. Say they have a silent E on the end of some of their words. Well,
Yeah.
then that tells me that that is an emerging skill. And that means their brain is actually primed for that skill. And that is a skill that I want to focus on right now, because
Yeah.
their brain is ready for it. So that's going to be where I'm going to focus my energy and get the most yield.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. As a mom, that's our perspective isn't, let's just watch how our kid is engaging it. We're like, we've got a mission. Let's do the mission. We need to check off the box, or we need to finish this page, or we need to do something, or we need to read the Bob books. That was my thing in my day. A couple of my kids still learned with Dick and Jane because I thought it was really charming. But how do you approach parents? Because in my experience, everything that we engage our kids, whether it's using certain curriculum or certain resources, we really need to know how to use them. And I find that learning how to use the resource is probably the most important element. What resource it is doesn't matter so much as how we use it. How would you speak to parents that are trying to engage their kids in reading? Is there some advice that you naturally give them?
Well, there are a lot of things. One thing is making sure that their brain and body are working well together first before you start learning. So that means um, doing something physical that's going to something heavy work like carrying books or doing some push-ups, or maybe you have an obstacle course in your house that they kind of do where they're crab walking and then they're hopping on one foot and then they're jumping up the stairs and then they're so doing something to get their brain and their body working well together. So that's the first place to start. And then thinking about, well, everything else kind of goes from the assessment. Once I know where they're at on their assessment, then whatever program it is, I can adapt it to that. Now, our program is super, super simple, and it adapts to each. It's specific and targeted for exactly where they are, so they don't stay in one place very long. They're not It's not, and we don't do a lot of paper pencil. We do some, but it's not an emphasis on paper pencil or filling in worksheets or workbooks or anything like that. It is more about like, how can you show me that you're growing, and working with them on, like I said, magnetic letters is the main thing that I use for teaching phonics, and then having categorizing. So like having one column of CVC words versus CVCE words, and then saying, okay, this side is red. They pick a red marker, a red smelly marker, and this side is maybe a pink smelly marker. And then they have to pick what marker to hold up when they go to spell the word, like name. Which side is that going to go in? And they hold up the marker. Well, that tells me ahead of time that whether they know the concept or not, because if they pick up the wrong marker, then I already know that I need to talk to them a little bit more about it before they've written down a thing. So the other
Yeah.
thing is setting them up for success from the beginning. What are the ways that I can set my child up for success? And thinking through their personality. Every kid is different. But also, what are the things that I can do with things like markers, like colors and stuff like that, that give me indicators long before their marker hits the paper, or doing things like magnetic letters versus writing it out. If you write with a smelly marker, that's a high risk activity, because you can't erase it. And so if
Right.
it's
Yeah.
wrong, that could be really frustrating. But if you can do sentence strips on like little note cards, and then, so it is wrong, throw it in the trash, done. So let's start on another one. It doesn't ruin their whole entire thing that they've been working on. Their five, because they're collecting, each sentence strip is a different sentence. And so there are things that we can do. Dry erase markers, they can erase it, and having the kind of erasers where it's on the end of their dry erase marker instead of a whole big eraser that erases their whole entire sentence accidentally when they try to erase it. So things like that that set them up so that they can't fail in the beginning until they build up the confidence to be
Yeah.
able to handle it. Those things are all key for me.
Thank you. That gives me so many questions. It actually compels so many questions. But one of the moms asked, um, I have three questions. The first one is phonics or whole word. Now, she's obviously coming from my generation, because I don't know if anybody teaches whole word reading anymore. But how do you approach reading? I mean, okay, you just told me how you approach it, but what are your thoughts on phonics versus whole word reading?
Well, my experience has been that they're both important.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so it just depends on what you're doing. You
Yeah.
absolutely need phonics, but you also need them to feel like they're readers. And so whole book reading too. Um, uh, Having a book that only has one word change, like I like bananas, I like grapes, I like, something like that. those words are not words that they're going to be able to read,
Yeah.
but they they support them anyway because the repetition of the sentence. There are a few sight words, and then there's a picture to go with it, especially if they drew the picture or they cut it out of the grocery store ads or something like that. So the key is not overemphasizing sound it out. Sound it out is only one tool of many. And if you think about the way that people read us, when I'm reading anatomy and physiology, I'm not going to only rely on sounding it out. That only gets me so far,
Yeah.
right? But reading ahead, going back to the beginning, getting a running start,
Yeah.
looking at the pictures, thinking about what's happening in the pictures, attaching that to something in my head. So
Context.
all of us as readers, yes, all of us as readers have three clue systems that we use when we read. One is reading for is meaning, and we're trying to make meaning out of our lives, even probably before we're born, even when we're in the womb. I'm guessing that we are trying to make meaning out of things, and definitely from the time that we're born, we're trying to make sense out of our world. So that is an area that kids have tons of support in. The second area is grammar, or sentence structure. And so, like, we wouldn't say, I saw a knot, like a not N-O-T, or I saw a I, or something like that. You know, sentence structure, it has to make sense from a sentence structure perspective. And that's another thing that in whatever our primary language is, we've been listening to correct sentence structure from the time that we were born. So that is an area that we have tons of support in. And so, and then the third area is the graphophonics, or the actual written letters.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, I usually have a pen with me, but you know, like, no matter which way I turn my glasses, they're always glasses, right? Or a pen is a pen is a pen. It doesn't matter how I turn a pen. But the letter B, if I turn it one way, it's a letter B. If I turn it the other way, it becomes a letter D. If I turn it upside down, it becomes a letter P. And
Yeah.
so our brains have to interpret that information differently. And that is not the way the rest of the world works. That is the least supportive way that, you know, like, if you think about, we've been making meaning out of our world since we were born. We've been listening to sentence structure since we were born, but our brains are not naturally equipped to know that a D goes this way and a B goes this way and a P goes this way. It's not. In fact, if you look at the research on brain development, the area that reading actually is the it's the Broca's area, I believe, of the brain, where facial recognition. It's the facial recognition part of your brain. So early people, I mean, facial recognition, body language is super important. Recognizing the very details of a person's facial expression on whether they're angry, whether they're happy, whether they're whatever, is super, super important. Being able to even recognize, okay, is this lion going to come after me, or is he just curious? You know, like, all of those things, the subtleties, those are details that our brains have been created to pay attention to. And so that area has been taken over by reading. And so we use those same details to recognize the subtleties of a D versus a P versus a Q,
Right.
all of that.
That
And
that
so
actually answers my question. One of my other questions was, what books or what resources would you suggest we read or learn about before we try to tackle that reading, or that teaching kids to read when it comes to brain development?
that's a great question.
Because you just spoke about something so, I think, pivotal. I recommend this when we're talking homeschooling stuff to parents, to actually do a little work on child development, like learning about child development. But the number one reason isn't because you become an expert in that area, but because if you understand what the process is for the brain's, gradual growth, then you go, oh, they're just not mentally ready for something. And then you're more patient.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. Because most of the things that I've learned was from reading tons of things throughout, over the last 35 years. So,
Yes. If
um,
you think of anything or you want to add anything later, I would appreciate it. Yeah.
I think the big one would be Kimberly Caraway has a book. Oh my goodness, what's it called? It's like teaching. It's been too long since I've looked at it. It's a great book, though. I'll
Yeah,
give that to you. I'll give that to you so you can put it in the chat. But
for
it
sure.
is on neuroscience. She's a neuroscientist. She's an educational neuroscientist, and she's given so many talks in our area about um, teaching kids and setting them up for success. And she talks about nutrition and what foods you eat that feed your brain, and the power of sleep and exercise. But she also talks about like how to set them up, what kinds of tests, how do you assess them in a way that they're going to succeed in your assessment, and how to it's just looking at, I mean, it's a thick book, but it's probably at least 500 pages, maybe 600, but
I think
it's really,
if we're even dabbling in all of that stuff, then we get clear about the reality of your child's existence and their
mhm,
growth. And then you go, okay, I can actually be more internally calm and actually look at the child and say, okay, they're not trying to counter me. They're trying
yeah,
to process something. And then
yeah,
you just are living in greater understanding of your kid.
yeah. I just realized my phone is on a low battery, so I'm gonna walk with you while I find my charger.
Sure. When you're talking, when this person was asking about whole word reading versus phonics, it was ironic for me that my firstborn, I shared a little bit about her reading journey. My second was four, or was, yeah, she was four when she started reading. And so pre-kindergarten, she went to kindergarten, only kindergarten. And so she was essentially reading before she went to kindergarten. And she definitely sounded things out. But by the time I was ready to teach reading to my 3-year-old, I realized she's reading. And I did not teach her, and her siblings didn't teach her. She was whole word reading. And I instinctively thought, no, 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 you can't whole word read. We're phonics. We're teaching phonics. And then I realized, no, it's done. She was fully embracing it. And she was a natural born reader. So by the time she came along, I thought for sure my fourth child, who was a boy, would balance it all out. And he'd maybe be 13 when he started reading, but he was actually 6. But they all did it very differently, how they processed it. And I was very surprised that all of a sudden she was whole word reading. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, so what she's doing is what we do when we're reading. When we're reading, our eyes are scanning. Every time we're reading a line, we're scanning the line before it, scanning the line above it, and we're thinking about all of it together and making sense out of it, making sure that it makes sense, making sure that the sentence structure fits what we're thinking about, or what the words we see are. Um, and so um send a voicemail. So there's so many things, like we're doing it all instinctively, and that's what she's doing. She's doing whole reading. She's just not relying on the phonics part of it. Instead, what she's doing is going, okay, I've seen that word before. I saw this word look like cat, and I already know that cat is spelled C-A-T, or CAT means cat. So if this word has a B at the beginning of it, it must mean bat. So she's doing that maybe more instinctively than other kids.
Yeah.
Some kids need to be, most kids actually need to be more intentionally taught that.
Yes.
But there are things that we can do when you were talking about whole word versus whole word versus decoding. If you're teaching sight words, your high frequency words, to try to teach them to decode them, like was, saw, um, uh, the,
Mhm.
so many of the words that we see all the time over and over and over and over again don't follow the rules.
Right.
So we can try to teach them that, but where are we going to get with that? They're trying to connect to something that doesn't make any sense. They can't apply to a rule to it. So sight words, we do want to teach them whole word.
Yeah.
And there are two reasons why. One is they often don't follow the rules, but the other is that those are the words that they see constantly. So we don't want them to slow down on words that they see constantly. We want them to, if they need a pause, it's on the words that they don't see as often, right?
Yeah.
Um, so if you think about, like, the analogy that I use is, if you think about a stream, and if you have rocks in the stream and we walk across those rocks to get across the stream, the sight words are the rocks, and
Mm.
those are the things that help us to get across
Yeah.
in a way, to keep from getting bogged down.
Right.
So it's okay to get bogged down on one word or two words out of 20, but if we're getting bogged down on every other word, and they're the high frequency words that don't even follow the rules anyway, so it doesn't matter what phonics rules we try to apply to it, we're
Mm.
just stuck. So it's important to have both. And then the other thing is, kids with Down syndrome learn better whole word. They
Mm.
have a very, very difficult time with decoding, or with the decoding concept.
Right.
And there are other kids, like kids with autism, tend to, in general, be really good coders, and they're visual learners, and they can, all those letter combinations click with them, and they can adapt it very, very easily, but then their comprehension is what they struggle with, depending on different kids with autism. Actually, autism is such a massive
Spectrum. Yeah.
difference in kids.
Mhm.
But I'm saying, like, higher functioning kids with autism can tend to decode anything you put in front of them, but then you try to ask them about what they read, and they don't know anything about what they read, or they weren't paying attention to it. So teaching them to create mental pictures in their mind would be the strategy for them and stuff. So
Yeah, that is
yeah.
really interesting. You're just like sharing so many different things that this is one of the biggest conversation points I have is parents discovering they're frustrated with their kids because they're trying to sit down to teach their kid to read. First of all, I just want to say that I did a lot of All About Spelling, and All About Spelling has the magnetic tiles. I had a kiddo who could read at 5, but she was not a natural speller, and she could read no problem, but putting letters together to make them make sense on paper has always been a challenge. It still is, and she's a full-grown adult now. But she asked me to bring in a spelling program, and I brought in All About Spelling. And so your ideas about dry erase markers and a big whiteboard with marker and magnetic tiles and all of that was beautiful. And so that was probably 15 years ago. And then I've also, or maybe 15, 10, 15. And then I recently am pulling apart my homeschool resources because I'm no longer homeschooling. I'm graduate homeschool mom. And I still have people wanting the All About Spelling program and are asking about what levels I have because they want to buy them. So it sounds like that's a popular program. Is that one that you recommend, or is there one you specifically recommend?
um well, the program that we used in the reading clinic was Words Their Way,
Mhm.
and I think that's a good program. um I use bits and pieces of different programs, depending. I don't think there's any one perfect program, and I think that every kid is different.
Yeah.
So I've found, like like Linda Mood Bell has these rocket folders for sight words, and I absolutely love it because it helps kids. It has four, you take a file folder, fold it in half, and then staple it into four different pockets. And then as they grow, as they get more, as they get faster with the sight words, they get to move it in the next pocket. So they're constantly seeing themselves improving. So that's one thing, that is one program that is, like, I use Linda Mood Bell for that, and I use them for like visualizing the letters, thinking about the letters that they see when they try to spell the word the, spelling it in the air, the, and spelling it out loud so that their brain is hearing it and locking it into one area of their brain. They're speaking it, that's locking it into another area of their brain. They're seeing it, that's locking it into another area of their brain. They're spelling it with their fingers, that's locking it into four different places in their brain. So as many places as I can lock it into their brain, the better they're going to do. So or the faster they'll retain it. So anyway, so I use a hodgepodge of a bunch of different programs. So I don't know that I'm the best, but for spelling.
No, I love that answer, because I actually always say there isn't one right curriculum. It doesn't exist. Don't
No.
spend money buying it, because it won't happen. Yeah.
And there isn't only one curriculum, but there are some that are completely ineffective.
Oh, okay.
Like if they're skipping around and it's not teaching them in a sequential way where there are gaps in the middle and the kids are frustrated with it, that doesn't work at all. Or books, or I mean, if you're trying to teach phonics, me personally, I don't agree with teaching. If you're teaching vowel teams, you teach long vowel teams first, because that's in general, like E A, E E, A I, O A, all of those teams that where the second vowel makes the first vowel say his name. That's more often seen than anything else. And so as far as the vowel teams, so I'm going to focus on getting that skill solid.
Yeah.
Long before I introduce AW and AU and OW and OU and all of these exceptions to the rules. And what I find is kids come to me and they have it all jumbled up because they were taught all of it together.
Interesting.
And so things like that, the timing is super important.
So that's interesting. When I was beginning homeschooling, I read a book that was considered an old homeschool book by Raymond Moore, Better Late Than Early. Are you familiar with this?
Mm-mm.
What they essentially encourage people to do is not worry about the reading and writing challenges that your child has. Let them just grow up, because there is not one right age to learn to read. And so I definitely engaged that. I thought, well, this is true. There isn't one right age. And I still don't think there's one right age. There's probably more of a typical age, but it's very variable. But what I came to understand too is that we can do our kids a disservice when we don't trust our mom instincts that something's not quite right. And we just keep saying, you know what, let's just power through and just keep trying to force it through. If we have a gut instinct that something's not right, there are people like you to help assess it and say, you know what, actually, it's only this, let's just deal with this. Or, oh, I see a larger problem that it's going to be really challenging for you to unpack at home. And it's going to set your child up for confidence if they feel like, yeah, I can do this. And it's not a giant challenge. And also mom as well, that you're not having to sludge through all this conflict with your kiddo and, feel like I'm not a good enough mother, or I don't know how to home educate, or whatever. It serves to actually get your child assessed sometimes.
Yeah. And the other thing is, like, so our program, Timberline reading program that we're developing right now for beginning readers, what I love about this program is the fact that, like, it gives you can watch the videos and learn about like the stages of reading and all of that, and what stage and the general things. But then when it comes to the individualizing for your own particular child, I mean, what we're trying to do is teach parents how to be detectives of their own readers. But at the same time, if you're stuck, what I love about this program is we're going to have campfire times each week. So it doesn't matter which level your child is in, this campfire time is at the same time. So you can come in and ask your questions and go, okay, I'm stuck here. So you have a person that can get you unstuck at a specific time each week so that you don't stay stuck. And
Love
if you're going, he's still frustrated and this isn't working, then we can say, hey, what if you try this? Or let's tweak this just a little bit. Or what about this? Because that's all we do is we start with one central way and then go, okay, how can we tweak this to get the most input or the most output out of the child and get the most growth out of them? What way is their brain most receptive of learning? So
this is off the top of my head, but I'm thinking this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. I do a variety of things in the coaching realm for homeschool moms, but one of the things that I do that is one of the biggest reasons people come to me is helping them address their big emotions and come up with a plan to engage how they're feeling or whatever stories they have that trigger them. And this discussion is often one. Me and helping the mom try to figure out how to engage her feelings and engage her emotional world, and you trying to help the child unpack whatever reading challenges or learning challenges they have. That together actually can be pretty powerful, both of us doing those kinds of things, because for me, I'm helping them become detectives of themselves. And then you are helping your kids or their kids figure out how to become detectives of their learning challenges. I would love to hear the components of your 9-week group coaching program. Are you able to share a few things about that? You don't have to share all the details if you don't want, but.
Well, we've kind of, that's true. I guess we've tweaked a little bit since the last time you and I have talked. So we broke it down. We used to have it as a 9-week course and everything was all in there for beginning readers. We've since realized that that's a little bit overwhelming and so we started looking at it in terms of like an onion and the layers and what is the, if you have what's the first thing that you need to know about reading if your child is just starting out, about learning their letters and what writing looks like and what reading looks like, that, and phonological awareness, your ability to manipulate the sounds that you hear, not the letters but the sounds, like breaking up the word, like what's the first sound you hear in cat, or rhyming or things like that are so integral to teaching kids how to read, but are so often overlooked. So we have our different mountains, if you will. We have our Blue Ridge Mountain that's like beginning, they're just learning all their consonant letters. And then we have the Purple Mountain, and that's like integrating vowels into it. And so teaching them how to do consonant vowel sounds together, and what writing looks like, and then what does it look like to read, to help your child to see themselves as a reader if all they know is their consonants and an occasional vowel. They're not ready for books, but we want them to see themselves as a reader, because if they see themselves as a reader, then they're going to do the work to become a reader.
Yeah.
And so using the books like I like bananas, I like, repetitive books like that and things like that to set them up for success. Forgot where I was going with all of this. We were talking about the mountains.
Yeah.
And so each mountain is a different level of, okay, what does a Blue Mountain reader look like? What does a Purple Mountain reader look like? What does a Green Mountain reader look like? And so it's getting into each of those little stages of reading development. And so parents, and then that also makes it a lot more affordable for parents, because then they can buy each little program, and then when their child is ready for the next level, they can buy the next level, and it's not as expensive, but also we're still providing one-on-one, but we're not doing it in a way where we're like teaching them the whole time. And if parents want to invest in like a one-on-one time with us, we're happy to sell that or provide that in packages so that it's cost effective for parents as well.
So
So
it's separate programs and they engage in for as long as they want, and it's something virtual or it's something in your hands.
so it has the program. We have 2 levels that are almost finished, but or very close to being finished, but basically it has the videos that you can see, and then it has like a workbook or a book that goes with it that kind of explains it, and then it also has um manipulatives. Like we developed a rock climbing scene so that when parents are working with their kids with magnetic letters, they can use Velcro. They choose their avatar, their mountain climber that they want, and then they can move them up each time they make a word. And so we have all these different assets that or materials that people can use to make their program, that to make it more fun for kids and everything.
You call it
So
Confident Kids Academy, but actually I think it makes confident parents too.
for sure, and that's our intention. That's what I think parents love the most, or is that like it's our intention to be their sigh of relief, like, okay, I'm frustrated, I've been trying to do this and it's not working. Oh, I can just go and get the answers that I need, or get more ideas right now. And so having that is valuable, I think. I know it was for me. That's how I learned as a beginning teacher,
Mm.
was through having someone that could help me to they would give us these skills, and then we'd try them out for a week, and then we'd come back and say, okay, this worked or this didn't work. And then they would say, okay, we'll try this, and then we'd go back and do it again. So that's so valuable, like because you
Yeah.
can learn all the things in the world in these teacher education courses or whatever, but it doesn't help you if when you go back to apply it with your own child. So
Yeah.
or another classroom of kids, your own students. So
It certainly speaks volumes about creating a literary rich environment, that no matter where your child is in their child development, when you are always reading or always having these rich conversations with them, or you're listening to an audiobook, or you're sitting with them with the book, or you're just sounding out words, stopping and actually engaging their question when they say, Mom, what does that say? Which when they're younger, they ask a lot. And then actually really creating that literature rich environment so that they have the potential to just kind of flow into it a little bit more easily.
right, for sure. Yeah, and teaching them to love the books that they're reading. I mean, read aloud time is so super important
Yeah.
for that cuddle up time, and it's something
Fun.
that we underestimate the value of so easily. Picking out good books and enriching their vocabulary, teaching them about new worlds, giving them reasons to want to learn to read.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But all the books that I have a really hard time letting go of books, but especially the read alouds with, specific stages of our homeschool. I'm like, but I can't get rid of that book. Like that's a memory attached to a place that we went, or remember when she was that age, just it creates so many memories. And also their vocabulary, like, wow, their vocabulary is incredible because they keep listening to all this stuff. Yeah. Beautiful.
It's so true. It's so true. I'm in the same stage because my 2 oldest ones, my oldest just moved into his own apartment in Ohio, and my middle son is moving into his college apartment about an hour and a half from here next week. And so we're in the middle. And so my youngest has been going through his room and getting rid of all of his stuff, and he's 14. So he's like, well, I
Yeah.
don't need all the read alouds. I want room for all my Lego displays and stuff like that, and And so
Really are at similar stages. I'm actually bringing my third daughter across the country. Like my two other girls are there across the country, have been for a few years, different stages. And then my youngest is 14 as well. And I'm about to have just one kiddo at home, which is so weird. I
it
feel
is.
just in this early stage. And now I'm like, what am I doing? Does this mean they're all leaving? Apparently they are. That apparently is the way it was
Right.
intended.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I'm excited though about I'm looking at which books I'm saving for my own, when eventually I'll have grandchildren and
Yes, me
and
too.
my own kids will be excited to show they'll be like,
Yeah,
oh, I remember when my mom used to read that to me, so it'll be cuddle up time, grandparent time.
me too, but I have too many, so I have to pick and choose. I have like 5 or 6 bookshelves of books. I got to have all the extra books from 2 different school libraries that were closing when my kids were much younger in homeschooling, and that was a lot of books. So
Yeah,
there are only so many books that my grandchildren will let me read to them, I'm sure.
I know. I know.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to
exciting.
go too. So
And I don't know how much that moment would relate to the younger homeschool moms that are watching us right now. But I know that when I was at their stage, I didn't imagine that this was going to happen when they actually leave or they grow up and they want to do their own thing. It seems so hard to believe, but it'll happen. It's bound to happen.
and
Yeah.
it's I think this is non-reading related, but just enjoy each stage they're in. I
Yeah.
can I look back and I just absolutely love every single stage that they went through. And each time they got a little older, they were in a new stage and there was something new to get
Oh,
excited about. I just
yeah.
love watching them grow and develop. So that's so much fun. Enjoy that part.
Yeah. It's been a wild ride. Just so many good memories. Yeah. Oh. Thank you so much for joining me today. I guess I have one last thought that I want to make sure that you share, but is you have a variety of resources that are free on your website, free tools, an ebook of strategies, and you offer a reader analysis. Would you add a little bit more to what I just said so that people are clear on what you're offering them?
Well, we also have a Facebook group. To be honest, I've been tutoring so much this summer that I haven't done the greatest of jobs on the Facebook group. But inside the Facebook group, if you go to the guides section of that, there are tons of videos to help with the different reading skills. So there's a lot there. We have a YouTube channel, Confident Kids Academy.
Yeah,
So um, the reader analysis is definitely a super valuable one because that's basically um giving parents, that's where I look at their writing
yeah,
and I analyze their writing and say, okay, these are the skills that I see emerging. These are the skills that, or these are the things that, this is what I would target next. This is what I know about your child based on their writing. And so they just take an idea and write whatever they want to, and then I analyze it. And then also having them read, I'll have them read a passage and figure out, or what do I get out of them as a reader? What kind of strategies do they use when they get stuck? What kind of strategies do they currently have? What's the next strategy that I would work with them on? So that's another thing. And then also I do the tower assessment. And that is to show you, like, based on their fluency, if you're wanting to look at how does your child compare to other kids who have taken this all across the United States and beyond. So I don't know if they use tower. I'm guessing they use tower in Canada too, but it's a test of word recognition or something like that. But anyway, um so that's a good indicator for parents who want to know, how does my child compare to other kids? Now, it doesn't measure comprehension, but we
yeah,
look at, our reading assessment packages um, do measure comprehension. We look at everything in our assessment packages. So Um, yeah. So if you on our website, there is a way for you to reach out to us through Messenger. And so if you have any questions or you're wanting to know more about anything, please reach out to us. There are a few things that are kind of a little bit in flux right now because the summer, like my calendar. My calendar is a little bit it's changing every single week. So I haven't caught up my Calendly and
Yeah.
for booking times and stuff. So if you reach out to me instead of the calendar on booking times to meet, that would be best until we get to the end of the summer, which is in 2 weeks. In Tennessee, we end, yeah, the kids all start back beginning of August. So
Wow, that's different than us. We're usually September sometime. Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
yeah.
that really is beautiful. All the different pieces that you shared, I really appreciate it. I know if I were to turn back time, my gut instinct would have been, it's not that something was wrong with anybody's reading comprehension or ability to read. It was that I wasn't confident
Mm-hmm.
approaching how to deal with this. And so I would have somehow, some way learn more about how to engage reading so that I was more confident. Not because it would be some magical, way to, package up the box of reading for my child, because there probably never is a perfect path to learning to read either. But there is more confidence when you have someone walking alongside you. And I really appreciate all the things that you shared and what you're offering in the parent community, really, but also the homeschool community. So thank you for being here. Do you have any last words of advice for the homeschool parent that's trying to teach her child to read?
Um, I think, well, a couple things. One is there is a time when your brains are primed for learning to read, and that is scientifically proven. I worked at the Vanderbilt Reading Clinic, and my boss was the head of the research reading research program in at Vanderbilt, which is all across, I mean, known across, it's one of the top programs in the world on reading or on reading research. And my son was part of the longitudinal study that was done from kindergarten through fifth grade, where they measured, they had an MRI each year, and they assessed them in different areas of reading development every year to see what area, and then they did the MRI so that they could see the images of which areas of the brain were activated when, and with how it corresponded with the written tests that they were taking. And what they found is that our brains are primed for learning to read between kindergarten and second grade, um, third grade with some kids, but after third grade, it takes more work to get the same result. That doesn't mean that your kid can't learn how to read, but it's more work. It's more trudging through kind of quicksand. And so if you're wanting the most results with reading, it's better to fit it into that window. Now, obviously, different kids are ready at different stages of that window, but there are always things that we can do to help them go to the next stage of being ready to read. And that's the important thing is don't give up just because your child may not be ready in this one area right now. There are still other things that you can be doing that are getting them ready for reading
Yeah.
and getting them equipped and excited and motivated and all of that in the process. And journal writing is so powerful, especially if you don't have a lot of expectations or you're not forcing things. Use their journal writing as your window into their
Yeah.
developmental stage, and then you can target those individual skills that you're noticing that you want to target next,
Yeah.
isolated away from that. So that would be my advice.
That is really great advice. And I really appreciate all the things that you had to share. Coming from a pediatric nursing background, trust your instincts is always my thoughts as a mom. If you know something's up, you're probably right. And, you can do this independently without any help. You can, but you could also be making yourself more frustrated. And you could certainly be making your kiddo less confident. And your name of your company, Confident Kids Academy, Shari, that is just spot on. That's exactly the goal, make them confident. So thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Teresa. It's good seeing you again.
Thank you.